you for joining us for today's Valentine's Day themed Ipsos Foresight webinar featuring new data and interviews with industry experts exploring shifts in the functional constructs of love and how they'll impact brands. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Matt Carmichael, editor of What the Future. Matt, you have the floor.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us and welcome to What the Future. I'm Matt Carmichael, the editor of What the Future and head of the Ipsos Trends and Foresight Lab. And this webinar today is about love and relationships and partnerships, but also about all of the products and services that are geared toward people who are in love or aren't. And if you've been to one of my webinars in the past, you know that I tend to talk about the future by also talking about my own past and present. And in a past life, I was a rock and roll photographer. And I shot this band called Swan, which was Billy Corgan's post-Smashing Pumpkins and then eventually pre-Smashing Pumpkins again band. And it's momentous for me in two ways. One, this was the first published photo I had in Rolling Stone magazine, which ticked the only career goal I ever really had, was to get my name in Rolling Stone. It is also the show where I met my future wife. So maybe not momentous in that order. But how's that for meet cute, which is a term I learned while working on this issue, as was polycule, which I learned from my teenager around the same time. There's a lot to unpack there. But how did you meet your partner or your spouse or your partner? You know, it's basic cocktail party questions, right? And we put that in the survey. But as we were talking, even just amongst our colleagues and our team, we had all kinds of great stories. I obviously met at a concert. We had one woman who said that her dad was a door-to-door salesman and called on her mom's house, and that's how they met. Another coworker, his parents had a really awkward run-in on their first meeting, literal run-in. They were in a car accident. And you know, maybe as AI gets more involved in our dating lives and gets more involved in how we drive cars, maybe that's a service they'll offer. You know, you're driving along and the AI senses that another driver would be a good match for you and stages a little fender bender as an icebreaker. Who knows? Maybe that's a service we'll see in the future. But when we put that survey question in the field, you know, how did you meet someone? We got a lot of the fairly expected responses, right? We still meet people in very traditional ways for the most part, through friends and family, through the kind of institutions that mediate these things like work and school and churches and community groups. But we also asked a verbatim and left an open-end question, and sometimes the verbatims bring home the gold. So we had one saying that they met their partner because their ex was in prison with him. And we had another who said that their partner served the foreclosure notice on their house, and that's how they met. So we meet in a lot of different ways. And tech will play a big role in this, as we'll talk about later. We talked to dating expert Dr. Jess Carbonneau, and she talks about how all this different technology is going to play into the way we meet each other, especially. And if you read the issue, which I encourage you to do, I did some experiments with ChatGPT, and I had it write a dating profile for someone. Then I just started role-playing with it and had someone respond to that and talked about how they could make their profile better. And I said, building off something that Dr. Carbonneau had said, that people are really bad at doing this themselves. And so I told the AI, you've been trained on people who are not good at this. How would you do something better? And the AI talked about how you would want to be authentic and genuine and open in your communications, which I thought was a little odd if you're having the AI generate that communication for you to be talking about authenticity. That led me down a whole rabbit hole of these kind of futuristic, and actually some of these are happening in the present, AI sort of Cyrano de Bergeracs, where the AI is whispering in your ear different ways that you can enhance your public persona and chat with people and kind of icebreakers and all that kind of stuff. And I even had an AI, a different AI, generate this image of a Cyrano de Bergerac for me. So technology is going to play into a lot of these different things. And I even had the chatbot write some kind of romance stories for me, which turned out super cheesy. They're in the issue. You should give it a read. But there are a lot of other things at play. And so as we think about this, let's talk about the future of love and let's dive in. So when we were planning this issue, we did what we always do, which is we start with kind of a domain map, a view of the space around the future of love. And we think about, the structures, the places where the institutions where we meet people, but also how those institutions help define love and help define relationships through weddings, through legal definitions, all of that kind of stuff. We think about technology. I've already started talking about AI and dating platforms. Will we see more companionship robots too? We talked a little bit about that in our aging issue last year for companion robots for seniors, but as more and more people are single, will we see more of that technology coming into play as well? We think about the generational differences in commitment, in how people are dating, in disinterest in all of this, as well as more and more people remain single. And we think about financial services, which are such a big part of this, right? I think financial services are waking up to the fact that there are, it's worth communicating to both genders about finance and to a more broad population. But still, it's hard to get a mortgage if you're not a married couple filing jointly. So we think about financial services, we think about tax situations, we think about debt and dual income and how people share and merge their money. And I think that's all super important as well. We think about self-love, about wellness and mental health, and how all of that plays in with loneliness and singlehood. And you can be lonely whether you're married, you can be lonely whether you're single. We talk about all of that. And finally, expression, how we go about physically and expressively showing that we love someone or that we are in some sort of relationship. So traditional things like flowers and jewelry, we talk about identity, and we think about how we communicate with each other. And when we're thinking about the future, we are always thinking about it through the framework of the Ipsos theory of change that underpins all our work in trends and foresight. We're thinking about the macro forces, the huge kind of tectonic plates that drive the world and drive the change in our lives. We're thinking about how those things are interrelating with the signals we see, the kind of headlines in the news that we don't know necessarily what they're going to mean, but our little futurist spidey sense tells us it's going to mean something. And in the center, always, we're thinking about the humans, the shifts or the lack of shifts in society, in markets, and people. And we use all of this to help kind of frame how we're going to think about the issue, but we also use that in our formal trends and foresight work as well. And through the issue, as we go through today's webinar, we'll introduce a number of tools that we talk about that we use internally and with our clients to think about the future and think about different scenarios that can come into play. And one of those is something called the future jobs to be done. And if you know about a traditional jobs to be done framework, it's this idea that we don't buy something just to buy it. We're really hiring things, products and services to solve problems, to do jobs for us. So we don't rent a wedding venue just to have a wedding venue. We're hiring it to host our friends and family and celebrate this big day. We don't buy a dating app. We hire it to help us screen potential dates or partners. And my colleague Sophie Washington and Ipsos Strategy 3 helped put us together these 3 potential jobs to be done related to love. One is about helping us authentically find the fish in our sea. With new spaces and places to meet people in digital and immersive web worlds, people may become overwhelmed by the opportunities, both on and off screen, and they might need a greater sense of trust. So their jobs around, helping me find the pool of matches on an app, or helping me filter the number of profiles without limiting the possibility of connection, helping me find my real love, right? And 2, there's an idea about helping be loved for being recognized on my terms, and their jobs around helping me feel seen and validated by social and governmental institutions. If you have a different identity or you are not a married couple filing jointly, how do you get identified in those institutions? How do you help me and my partner make us legally official, but not necessarily in the traditional sense? And how do you help me benefit from financial perks that are traditionally afforded to married couples or couples in some sort of traditional recognized relationships? And finally, help me love and respect other people. So how do I avoid being siloed romantically or platonically based on my views? How do I feel a human connection with others who may be different from me? And how do I overcome learned prejudice and practice love for others? And these are all great ideas about that kind of guide us to think about the products and the services and the kind of innovation we need to do to make sure that the companies we work with and the brands we work with and the governments we work with even are helping create a world where love can be expressed as all of that is changing around us. Another thing we've started working on in What the Future especially is thinking about the future optimism gaps. And we think about, or we ask a series of questions about the future that people want and the future that people expect or think is likely. And we largely agree when asked on a common vision of the future. We want a world where relationships have some sort of legal standing and where tech makes it easier to find partners. But even people who don't want that future expect we're going to wind up there. There's a gap, however, between other aspects of the future we want for love, that divorce is less complicated, that people will partner with just one person, where lifelong relationships are normalized, and where people marry for love, not status. And the future we think is likely. Many of these are policy questions, but how can brands and institutions help bridge these optimism gaps? There's absolutely a role to play in technology for enabling people to meet and date and support in their ongoing relationships. And there's a huge role for financial services to recognize that less and less population is married couples. Only 1 in 3 Americans are single. Yet, how do folks get a mortgage or have a more fluid joint checking account? My password manager even allows me to have a vault and my wife's vault and my vault and a shared vault for both of us. Why not my bank? The point is there are gaps between what we want and what we think we will get. And gaps are opportunities. Speaking of optimism, we asked more than 20,000 people around the world about their outlook for love. Very few think it will get easier to find. In most markets, a plurality think it will get harder, especially in the US, where we have an epidemic of loneliness, but only 13% think it will get easier to find a partner. So where does that leave us all? Well, let's turn to our experts for some advice. Dan Cox is a senior fellow at the nonpartisan think tank, American Enterprise Institute. He researches cultural shifts in religion and youth, as well as loneliness, arguably the flip side of love. He sees ongoing changes in how people meet, how their relationships work, how they are defined, and how they are structured, which feels like a lot of change for something as old as humanity itself. Dr. Cox sees the institutions where people meet changing, which could lead to a rise in more online forms of meeting and dating. But he finds the commodification and gamification of relationships troubling, he says. He says, quote, "I worry that technology, in its effort to supplement our sociability, actually replaces it. Maintaining relationships is hard enough, especially with people having overall less community ties in their lives to support them. And all of that leads to more fluidity in identity, in structures, in duration, and types of partnerships. So as people's connections with institutions like governments and religions weaken, how will they define relationships in the future? And will the institutions keep up with the changes to tax codes, legal definitions, lending requirements, etc.? Or will they swing back to being more prescriptive? He thinks that's especially tough for the traditional love unit, the nuclear family, but also thinks about what he's saying through the lens of non-nuclear families too. Here's what he told me.
There's an expectation that one parent is not working. Societally, we have not moved on from that. As culturally, we've progressed light years from where things were in the 50s in terms of societal expectations and gender roles and all that stuff. But in terms of a lot of how our institutions are functioning, we have not advanced nearly as quickly. And so I think a lot of parents in which both parents are working, it's incredibly difficult to navigate. And I think employers are starting to realize, oh, wow, we need to provide some flexibility, but it's slow going. And the schools are probably going to be the last ones to change. This is how they operated for so long. And they're these big lumbering institutions, and it's going to be a while before. And I think they're going to be like forced to make these changes.
In an era of shifting social structures around marriage and relationships, Americans are making romantic decisions differently and on their own terms. Quantitative data only reveals part of this picture. If brands want to form authentic connections with people as they navigate their love decisions, they need to listen. Ethnography is a powerful tool brands can use to gain a deeper understanding of personal matters that aren't always easy to articulate, says April Jeffries, president of the Global Ethnography and Immersion in Ipsos's UU practice, our largest qualitative practice in the world. By holding multiple audio and video one-on-one conversations over time, brands can digitally capture and connect with people in their normal, natural environments. Seeing them complete designated tasks that unveil more intimate beliefs and values, brands can tap into matters of the heart and gain authentic insights on how people find love, give love, and want to be loved in the world today, Jeffrey says. For brands looking to understand how relationships with people and products shape our lives, heart-to-heart could be the right step. Jess Carbonneau, aka Dr. Jess, knows a lot about how people meet and date. As the former lead researcher and sociologist for dating platforms like Tinder and Bumble, she had access to a trove of dating data, the kinds you could use to train an AI with, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. As the institutions where we meet people shift, 31% of baby boomers met their partner at work or religious or social group, online platforms will fill the void. Gen Zers and millennials are twice as likely to meet via a dating app, 16%, than boomers, 17%. Carbonneau says we are in the second generation of online dating. In the first wave, you posted your profile to Match.com or a similar site. But in the second stage, Tinder and Bumble and similar apps added a match feature where both sides have to be interested in each other through swiping, etc. As for how we'll evolve, AI could bring in outside data to help the matchmaking process. A tech evolution would have to drive the next quantum leap, she says. Carbonneau thinks dating platforms and the data have the dating foundation to train an AI, and that premium services like AI assist coaching could be useful and profitable add-ons for dating platforms. Because, as she learned, and we talked about earlier, people are really bad at marketing themselves. And of course, there's the metaverse. Here's what she had to say about that. And I'll note she was experiencing a side effect of love. She is a new mom. And as Cox said, it's a challenge to balance all the thing. But her new daughter was a great sport about letting mom do this interview. And as a parent, I get it. Here's what she and her daughter had to tell me.
The metaverse could serve as a first date for individuals in a way that we haven't thought about. And I think that the pandemic was a precursor to this because people use Zoom and other video-based platforms as mechanisms by which to have a first date, a first meet with somebody before they actually met physically in person. And I could see the metaverse as serving in the same way. Rather than having people leave their homes to meet somebody in person for the first date, they could go on a date in the metaverse, whether it's to a virtual cafe or to a virtual restaurant, a virtual bar, a virtual concert. I could see people meeting that way. And also in the context of a long distance relationship, the metaverse could serve as a mechanism by which people could meet each other. You have in the metaverse right now people having sex. You have people meeting for business purposes and meeting socially and doing concerts. So I think it'd be very interesting to see whether or not the metaverse takes off as a first date mechanism. And I imagine that's how it will work for people as we become more aware of technology and more interested in having our homes be our base and perhaps using that as a filtering mechanism.
The advent of social media and online dating apps has certainly changed the dating landscape. But the Me Too movement has ushered in an increased focus on consent, safety, and accountability in relationships. Has it made men scared to date too? 3 in 5 Americans agree that women tolerate less bad behavior in relationships than they did a decade ago, according to Ipsos data. Yet a bare majority also feel that increasing discussions on sexual harassment and assaults has made dating harder for men. These views create an opportunity for marketers to support female empowerment, says Mallory Newell, a vice president within Ipsos's public polling practice. Opening the dialogue and modeling what is acceptable behavior in a relationship could make the difference for better outcomes and experiences for everyone. Finding a love match is one challenge. Then there's happily ever after. And since 2009, Meredith Goldstein has been giving daily advice to Bostonians and beyond about dating, love, and relationship through her Love Letters column. Her column has spawned a popular podcast, now in its 7th season, as well as an active community who share their takes on the letters and Goldstein's responses. She's also written a deeply personal memoir. And over time, she's seen a host of attitudes shift about courting, commitment, and singlehood. Historically, relationships were also contractual, where people married for money or property. Marrying for love was less of an option. Over time, love became the necessity, says Goldstein. That set up the situation we're in currently, where many people then don't need to get married, although many still do at least need to couple up financially. But often there's a tension between a relationship based on love and existing gender norms with historical roots in a more contract-based relationship. In short, things are changing, and companies are not changing with it fast enough. Here's what she told Kate MacArthur.
There are times where I feel like, despite knowing history, there's a whole set of people, even in my life, that don't truly believe that this whole thing was built on that contract. At some point, and you can point to different times in history, but at some point, this became where love was the necessity. So like simultaneously, you've got the collapse of a whole class of people where no one has any money, or you have all the money, but also you don't need to get married. It's like, I don't need this, so I'm not going to do it unless it's additive and it's about being madly in love. But yet we're going to use the old model for the contract. When you talk about companies and the world and all of the services we use, sometimes I feel like they forget what's happening too, where they are selling couples, they are selling coupledom, and yet that's actually not what most people are experiencing. More people than ever are living alone. And I saw a tweet, and I wish I could credit the person who said it, but somebody tweeted the other day, why don't I see more holiday commercials for single people, where it's like them standing in front of a tree with friends, still shown this thing that doesn't fully make sense to me a lot of the time.
Relationships that are based on love or based on more functional needs still need money. And in the US, the middle class has been kept marginally afloat in the recent decades by adding a second earner. That's true for upper classes as well. Dual incomes are a key driver for affluence in the US. In fact, more than 1/3 of respondents in our fall 2002 Ipsos affluence survey wouldn't qualify as affluent, i.e. having a household income of $125,000 or more, without being a multi-income household. Since the survey's origin in the late 1970s, the rise of dual income households has been the main driver of growth for the affluent. But since 2017, that has started to shift. The size of the overall affluent population has steadily risen, yet the proportion of households that need dual earners to attain mass affluent incomes of $125,000 to $250,000 fell dramatically. That change accelerated as people left the workforce during COVID-19. So what the data is showing is wage earners earning more money, and as a result, more people attaining affluent status on single incomes, says Kip Davis, an insights director in the Ipsos audience measurement team. Despite the increased normalization of choosing to stay single, some people choose or continue to feel pressure to pair up. To make matters perceptually worse, recent evidence shows that married individuals benefit from a longer life expectancy, presumably due to the sense of connection, support, and stability that committed relationships bring. While we have an inherent need for connection to others, there are more ways than pairing up to generate a sense of belonging. Behavioral science offers several means to connection that anyone can use to maintain and restore mental well-being. Connect to nature. Going outside makes us feel more human and connected, provides an escape for our cognitively demanding lives, and decreases stress hormones. Food, family, and friends. Eating together drives interpersonal trust, and we enjoy sharing meals more. And lend a helping hand. Doing something for others affirms our sense of autonomy and competence and offers a way to increase our sense of relatedness and connection to others. Single people have more leisure time and freedom, giving brands opportunities to engage them while they're also enhancing their well-being, says Sarah Mittal, a PhD and director in the Ipsos behavioral science team. With societal shifts, people are re-examining how they express and commemorate love. When and how people put a ring on it is an enduring ritual, even if the relationships they symbolize are involving. Luciano Rodenbusch, president of Pandora Jewelry North America, has seen these changes firsthand over the past dozen years, including during his decades at Tiffany & Co. As Pandora expands its focus beyond charm bracelets to rings and other creations, he sees potential for people to create their own stories and meanings. Most Americans say they express love through words and deeds rather than through gifts or jewelry. That doesn't mean they're mutually exclusive, especially with younger generations who are making social media friendly promposals and homecoming events as grand as some weddings. Younger generations are looking for more substantial memories, correlations, and relationships that have meaning and aren't so quick to disappear like digital media, says Rodenbush. He sees a tension in the trends. Further, he sees that the two ends of the tension can coexist. He thinks digital is important, but so too is the physical world. Here's what he told Kate MacArthur.
More than 80% of our client journeys start on the digital space. So we need to be strong there, but in our specific case, and I think in the specific case of our industry, it's an industry where memories are encapsulated in physical things. And you want to take that piece of jewelry, and every single piece of jewelry has a memory attached to that. So I still believe that that correlation between the physical thing and the memory will continue as part of this industry. So different than the others, that the avatars, and probably I think brands like ours will be more present in the avatar world, where you can have your Pandora bracelet in your Fortnite avatar and things like that, but that's not going to be the core of the conversation. We just probably will not want to be absent from there. But the core of the conversation, I think, we're still going to be in the physical world.
We've used the term tension a lot of times throughout this webinar, and we think about tensions as a thing that helps kind of determine which future we might be heading towards. And the great thing about them is they're things we can measure today. So we've surveyed on 4 different tensions that we think are really helping drive the future of love, and I'm going to walk you through those now. Tension 1 is a literal church and state tension, because marriage is often a religious rite, yet it's also a legal definition. And that definition affects how someone or a couple accesses loans, mortgages, healthcare, navigates immigration status, and file their taxes. As our society becomes more secular, this tension could shift. Currently, about 60% of people say that marriage should be defined by the state and legal system. And if it does shift, we need to evolve more systems to replace the community and support functions religious institutions used to provide to keep relationships strong and healthy, says Dan Cox from AEI. It's important that when we are dating, he says, or married and trying to raise a family, that we have a broader community that can support us, he says. Increasingly, a lot of Americans are out there on our own, particularly the millennial generation who got married later and had kids a lot later. Tension 2, dating apps for finding the one or nah. Millennials are a curious group when it comes to dating. They're much more like Gen Xers in that thinking their dating apps are a good tool for finding a lifelong partner. That makes a certain amount of sense because those generations grew up with the dating sites and apps as a tool. But they're more like Gen Zers, and they strongly believe that finding a lifelong partner or spouse is the point of dating apps in the first place. Dr. Jess Carbonneau thinks that dating apps are a great tool for meeting people, but the rest is kind of up to you. She says, dating apps can only bring you so far in the same way that friends, family, educational, religious institutions, bars can only bring you to that meeting. Then it's fundamentally up to you to have the relationship prosper. So as we were talking about earlier, will AI tools help people use these platforms more effectively? And if so, will this tension between just split really evenly, will that start to shift one way or the other? Tension 3. Like most Americans, the majority of Gen Zers and millennials believe that showing love through actions and feelings are more important than doing so with flowers and jewelry. These younger generations, however, lean a bit more towards gifts than baby boomers and beyond. That corresponds to the flurry of young people popping will you questions for friendships, to promposals, to engagements, often captured on social media with tokens like promise rings to commemorate the moment. Younger generations are looking for more substantial memories, correlationships, and relationships that have meaning and aren't so quick to disappear like digital media, says Pandora's Luciano Rodenbush. And we see that tension today, that actions and feelings are much more important than gifts, but gifts are still important too, especially on a day like today. And our final tension, financial partners defined legally or flexibly. And currently about 60% of people say that financial services like loans and taxes should be flexible in defining relationships. But is that the reality? The share of Americans who are married has been falling for decades, and as of 2020, dipped below 50% of women for the first time. As we saw with our affluent expert, Kip Davis, adding a second income is how the middle class as well as affluents have kept up their financial standing. But financial institutions, lending regulations, and tax codes have been slow to recognize or accommodate alternative forms of relationships. So how are unmarried people supposed to finance their combined lives? When you talk about companies and all the services we use, sometimes I feel like they forget what's happening, where they're selling coupledom, says relationship advice columnist Meredith Goldstein. Yet that's not exactly what most people are experiencing. So how these tensions play out. In the issue, we lay out two plausible scenarios, and we use these tensions as a waypoint in between. So in scenario one, we think about the world in one way, then we think about how one of those tensions might shift and how that might signal that we're actually headed toward a slightly different future. So check out the issue, What the Future, and make sure you read through all the way to get to those scenarios. And we use these tensions as a tool, and it's a tool to imagine what the world would look like if the lines shift. And of course, these are all things we can research now and trend over time. And that, of course, is why we do all of this, to get you, and frankly us, thinking about the future. Because when you imagine possible tomorrows, you're going to ask better questions today. When you think about the future, when you get beyond just the problems you're facing this week or this quarter or this month, you start to think about what the world is going to look like and what the customers are going to look like in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10. And what services will you need and what products will you need to innovate? How will the customer experience be different? How will the user experience of those new products and services be different? So these are all great things to research. These are all things we are thinking about here at Ipsos, and we love thinking about them with you. In our future, please, you can use this QR code or you can go to future.ipsos.com, subscribe to What the Future. Our upcoming issues are going to touch on the future of purpose, farming, gender, and a new addition to the slate, the future of intelligence. You'll get a once-a-month newsletter when the issue drops if you sign up, and we would love to have you. So again, thank you all for coming out. I hope you've enjoyed this Future of Love. Happy Valentine's Day to you all, and thanks for spending a little bit of it with me. That's all I got. Thanks.